Most people assume Christianity is a European religion, that it started there, grew there, and belongs there. But in 600 AD, the center of the Christian world wasn't Rome. It wasn't Paris. It was Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem. Rome was the western edge of something much larger. So how did the faith of the Middle East become the faith of Europe? And what happened to the world it left behind? To understand what was lost, you have to see what the world actually looked like before it happened. In 600 AD, Christianity wasn't a European religion in any meaningful geographic sense. Its 5 great centers, the seats of authority that theologians actually deferred to, were Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Carthage. 4 of those 5 are in the Middle East or North Africa. Rome was the 5th, and it was the outlier, not the anchor. Constantinople was the true capital. The Roman emperor sat there. The ecumenical patriarch sat there. The city held somewhere around 500,000 people, which made it the largest urban center in the Christian world by a wide margin. When church councils needed to settle doctrine, they didn't sail to Rome. The Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD, one of the most consequential theological gatherings in Christian history, was held at Chalcedon directly across the water from Constantinople, because that's where the power was. Rome sent delegates. It didn't host the event. Alexandria was the intellectual engine of the faith. The theological tradition built there, running through figures like Athanasius and Cyril, shaped how Christians understood the nature of Christ. It wasn't just a city with churches. It was the place where Christianity's core arguments got worked out, debated, and defined. Antioch sits in what is now southern Turkey, right on the Syrian border. It's where the followers of Jesus were first called Christians, according to the Acts of the Apostles. The church there traced its founding to the Apostle Peter before he ever went to Rome. Jerusalem needs no explanation. It was the city where the faith began. The Mediterranean in 600 AD functioned as a Christian lake. Pilgrims traveled its coasts. Grain from Egypt fed Constantinople. Theological letters moved between seas across its waters. Trade, doctrine, and political power all ran through the same connected system. Rome was part of that system, yes, but it was the western frontier, not the center. The stakes here aren't just religious. Who controls the Mediterranean controls the movement of goods, armies, and ideas. In 600 AD, Christians controlled it almost entirely. Within a century, that had changed forever. Then, within a single lifetime, it collapsed. Muhammad dies in 632 AD. Within 2 years, Arab armies are moving north into the Levant. The speed of what follows is something historians still argue about, because it's genuinely hard to explain. Syria falls first. In 636 AD, at the Battle of Yarmouk, the Eastern Roman army is broken decisively on a river plain, in what is now Jordan. The Romans don't recover from it. Antioch falls. Damascus falls. The entire Syrian interior passes out of Christian political control in a single campaign season. Egypt falls next. In 641 AD, Alexandria surrenders. This is the second greatest Christian city on earth, the seat of the patriarch, the home of one of the oldest Christian traditions in the world, and it's gone within a decade of Yarmouk. The Arabic sources describe the conquest as liberation. The Egyptian bishop John of Nikiu, writing from inside the country as it happened, describes something entirely different. His chronicle records looting, the flight of Roman officials, the disorder that followed the Arab advance through the Delta, and the surrender of Alexandria as a catastrophe. He's not writing theology. He's writing what he saw. And what he saw wasn't a city welcoming its new rulers. North Africa follows on a slower timeline, but the outcome is the same. Carthage falls in 698 AD. This is the church that produced Tertullian, the man who gave Latin Christianity most of its theological vocabulary. It produced Augustine, whose ideas about grace and original sin still run through Western Christian thought today. That church doesn't survive. Unlike Egypt, where Coptic Christianity holds on in diminished form, North African Christianity is effectively extinguished It doesn't retreat. It disappears. The speed of all this matters enormously. This isn't a slow cultural drift. It isn't gradual demographic change over centuries. Syria, Egypt, and North Africa fall within roughly 60 years of Muhammad's death. The Roman Empire loses its wealthiest provinces, its most populated cities, and its most theologically active regions inside a single human lifespan. What follows the conquest is where the long-term damage gets done. Raymond Ibrahim, drawing on the primary legal sources of the period, has written on how the architecture that followed the conquests was specifically designed to apply sustained pressure on non-Muslim populations over time. The jizya was a poll tax levied on Christians and Jews as the price of practicing their faith. The dhimmi framework placed Christians under a web of legal restrictions. Church construction was banned in many jurisdictions. Public displays of Christian worship were constrained. Christians couldn't testify against Muslims in court. These rules varied in their enforcement across time and place, but they weren't incidental. They were structural. Conversion under that system didn't require a sword at anyone's throat. It just required time. Each generation faced the same calculation: pay more, hold less status, face more restrictions, or convert and have those pressures removed. Over 200 years, that calculation did its work. After 650 AD, Arab fleets began operating in the Mediterranean for the first time. The Christian lake starts to fracture. Arab ships raid Cyprus, Rhodes, and the coasts of Asia Minor. The sea routes that connected the Christian world become contested and then dangerous. Constantinople itself comes under direct assault. Arab forces besiege the city from 674 to 618 AD. They try again from 717 to 718 AD. Both sieges fail. Greek fire, the Byzantine naval incendiary weapon, breaks the Arab fleets both times. But the city that was once the administrative center of a Mediterranean-spanning Christian civilization is now a fortress holding a shrinking perimeter. Rome, the western edge of a world that no longer exists, is now becoming the last major Christian capital left standing. The conquest was the opening move. What came after it was slower, quieter, and in some ways more total. Take Egypt first, because it's the clearest case study. When the Arabs took Alexandria in 641 AD, Egypt was a majority Christian country. The Coptic Church was ancient, deeply rooted, spoken in a language that traced directly back to pharaonic Egypt. It didn't disappear overnight. But under the weight of the jizya, the legal disabilities, the ban on building new churches, the restricted ability to pass faith to the next generation without economic cost, it contracted. By the time you reach the 9th and 10th centuries, Christians have gone from the dominant population to a shrinking minority concentrated in certain regions and professions. Nobody forced them to convert at gunpoint in most cases. The system just made staying Christian expensive in ways that compounded across generations. Syria and Iraq follow a similar pattern. The cities that were once the intellectual centers of Eastern Christianity, Antioch, Edessa, Nisibis, places where theologians argued about the nature of Christ in Greek and Syriac, become backwaters of a faith slowly losing its institutional base. The schools close or contract. The bishops lead smaller and smaller congregations. The communities don't vanish immediately. Some survive into the modern period, but they shrink from majorities into minorities, into isolated pockets. North Africa is the hardest case to explain and the most sobering. Egypt kept its church. Syria kept fragments of its church. North Africa didn't. The Christian tradition there, which had been Latin-speaking, theologically productive, and deeply embedded in the cities of the Maghreb, is gone by roughly the 12th century. There's no clean explanation for why North Africa lost its Christian identity completely when Egypt didn't. The Berber-speaking rural population may not have had the same institutional structures to hold the faith together. The Arab settlement patterns may have been denser. What we know is the outcome. Tertullian's church, Augustine's church, the church that argued for the canon of Scripture and the doctrine of the Trinity, simply stops existing. Here's the reframe this whole story is building toward. Europe didn't become the home of Christianity because Europeans were uniquely suited to it, or because the faith flourished more naturally in a colder climate, or because Western culture was somehow more receptive to the gospel. Europe became the home of Christianity because everywhere else Christianity had existed. It was systematically pushed to the margins or erased entirely. Rome didn't inherit the center by earning it. Rome inherited the center because the center was taken. Constantinople held longer than anywhere else. The Eastern Roman Empire kept its Christian identity for another 800 years after Alexandria fell. But in 1453, Ottoman forces under Mehmed II breached the Theodosian walls, and the city falls. The Hagia Sophia, built by Justinian in the 6th century as the greatest church in Christendom, is converted to a mosque within days. The ecumenical patriarch survives under Ottoman rule, but stripped of political power. The last continuous thread of the original Christian heartland is cut. The shift is complete. Rome didn't choose its role. It inherited it by default, after everything east of it was gone or diminished past recognition. The places where the faith was born, defined, and argued into existence, those places were taken. That's not a footnote to Christian history. It's the central fact that explains the Crusades, the Ottoman pressure on Europe, the fracture lines of the modern Middle East, and the map of global Christianity today. When you look at that map and wonder why the faith looks so Western, you're looking at the 7th century. Subscribe if you want history told the way the primary sources actually tell it.